The transfer portal has been open for 4 days, and BYU has 0 commitments so far. Why am I not concerned? Because this is exactly how BYU operates.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insider, your host here on this show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On America's #1 sports podcast network. Coming up on today's show, we are talking about the transfer portal. It's been open for 4 days. Why does BYU have 0 commitments, and why is this exactly how BYU operates? We'll get into that. Then we're going to talk about Gary Anderson. Is he the whisperer that's going to make everything go for BYU defensively in 2026, even if he's not the defensive coordinator? And then we'll talk about a position group I believe BYU absolutely could clean up in when it comes to the transfer portal if they're so desired to do so. We'll get into that. It's the offensive line to spoil the surprise. All of that brought to you today by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and get $20 off your first purchase. All right, so we're out of the chute here. The transfer portal, or tomorrow will be day 5 of the 10-day window it's supposed to be open for, as I understand it. And BYU has exactly 0 commitments so far. Now, to recap, for those of you who are unaware, the transfer portal window is open for players to go into the portal. The 10-day window does not require them to exit the portal during those 10 days. They can go in the portal at any point during this window, but then they can come out of the portal at any point. Just have to go in. Now, BYU, as they often do, has been a little bit slow out of the gates. And some of you, I've gotten some DMs and some emails over the weekend saying, Jake, where's all the portal stuff for BYU? We're seeing Indiana. We're seeing Texas Tech. We're seeing all these big name programs getting commitments from a lot of different guys, top guys, according to the experts, when it comes to the transfer portal. And my message to them and you is to not worry. If you look at the history with BYU and the transfer portal, often BYU is one of the slower moving, and I don't say necessarily they're slow, but they are one of these slower teams in terms of getting commitments announced and or revealed because it's by design. Here's the deal about the transfer portal. BYU, much like they do in high school recruiting, has to vet guys, and it does take a little more time. They can't just go out to a guy and say, hey, you want to come play for us? Great. Here's sign on the dotted line and life's good. It'd be easy, absolutely easy if BYU could do that, but we all know that BYU, being affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has a few more stringent rules than other programs out there, including the honor code, academic requirements. There's a checklist that BYU has to go through. That does not make BYU any less desirable in terms of guys in the portal they have either already talked to, will be talking to, or will be targeting for all those different circumstances when it comes to guys in the transfer portal. I can assure you, based on the interactions I've had with some players that have been in the portal, BYU is active. They are not sitting on their hands. They're not standing idly by. The defensive coordinator title or the promotion or whatever they're going to do at defensive coordinator and cornerbacks coach, that's not slowing BYU down. It's just that BYU, as they often do, has to make sure guys fit what BYU is looking for. There are a lot of guys out there that I would imagine that are going to be BYU guys, and I look at the likes of a Liona Lefau. He seems like a guy transferring from Texas who would fit very well in BYU system, but BYU has to make sure his grades are on the up and up. They have to make sure that everything checks out with regards to his background, and so long as that goes down, he very well could be a BYU Cougar if that's what he ultimately decides to do. Same thing for a guy like Walker Lyons, etc. But time, it's not the team that gets out of the gates the fastest that's the best team. Yes, I know that Indiana just got Josh Hoover. They got a top-tier wide receiver. They've garnered a lot of top-tier talent. That's exactly what Curt Cignetti is all about. That's not Kalani Sitake's style. And if you look at the way BYU's transfer portal classes have happened is, yeah, they have a handful of guys transfer out right when the portal window opens, but then BYU they may not get the guys in the first few days of that portal cycle really getting going. But as things go along, BYU starts to pick up some steam, and they start to pick up guys who have impacts for the BYU football program. Just look at these past recruiting cycles for BYU. You can think of guys like, for example, Andrew Gentry. He came to BYU from Michigan. Well, Michigan was not him leaving Michigan. BYU was not the destination maybe immediately in his mind, but BYU won out in that recruiting battle. And the other thing about this is you are battling other programs. It's not that you pick one guy, say, okay, we want you in Provo. They said, okay, no, there are a lot of different guys with a lot of different options, and you have to fight for those guys in the portal. So understand that, yeah, while BYU doesn't have any announcements so far in terms of commitments, and those could come as soon as today, I would imagine, if guys start to commit. But as it stands, I'm not that concerned about BYU because this is just kind of par for the course when it comes to the Cougars. Yeah, they may not have the big names that are popping off the page in terms of big names that you're looking for, but in time, BYU's transfer portal haul, it'll be a good one. I trust the BYU coaches have done their research. They know the guys that they want to have in this program. And so long as everything goes according to plan with guys checking out with regards to signing on the dotted line when it comes to the honor code, their grades check out, and the coaches deem them a fit for what BYU is culturally in terms of the culture that Kalani Sitake has established in Provo, great. Get them in here. Let's go to work and make another run at a Big 12 title in the college football playoff in 2026. BYU is never going to be a program that's going to take a massive transfer portal class because they learned their lesson the hard way in 2023. That initial transfer portal class going into the Big 12, BYU turned over more than half of their roster. If you looked at the transfer portal, high school enrollees, return missionaries, and the like, and it really, I think, caused some issues in terms of getting the roster to gel. And that contributed to a 5-7 season. Well, BYU buckled down on culture in 2024, 2025, and the results were an 11-2 campaign and a 12-2 campaign. I think the track record and the method to the madness, it seems to work for BYU. So, yeah, while they may not have those guys committed, rest assured that there is a method to said madness. And BYU, they'll get the job done in time. Just give them that time, that latitude to get everything in order, because I know that Kalani Sitake knows what he needs in the transfer portal. And you look at the likes of like a running back, maybe a star tight end and the like, and linebackers. There's a whole litany of things that BYU could utilize out of the transfer portal. And Kalani Sitake is not unaware of that, but he just needs to be given the latitude and the time that Cougar fans trust him. He's got this. We have seen major success with the way BYU has operated in the portal in the past, especially the last 2 years. And I think it's kind of the same track record going into this portal window. And given the adequate time and the resources that BYU has at their disposal, I think they'll be just fine in terms of bringing in guys who can have an impact and help BYU win big, hopefully, in 2026. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about a guy who I think is going to have an outsized role for BYU in 2026, even though he's not going to be front and center. Yeah, Gary Anderson. What does he mean to the BYU football program? A whole lot. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during the basketball season. That's where FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel is giving fans a new way to kick off the weekend with their brand new NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window or special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern time have become appointment viewing when it comes to the NBA. And obviously with NBA Happy Hour, it gives you an opportunity to cash in on this. They have new boosts, bonuses, and surprises that you can't get anytime else. And it's easy to check the weekend special before tip-off, make a move before the window closes. You know, add some extra energy to that Friday night basketball without having to overthink it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday, 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel. They are the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us. And thank you, as always, for making all the folks over at Locked On, America's #1 sports podcast network. All right. A lot of news out there. And obviously last Friday, in fact, we talked about this a little bit, that Gary Anderson announced that he is going to be sticking with the BYU football program. He told that to Hans and Scotty G, the radio station I work for, the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that was some big news because a lot of people, yours truly included, thought that he would go where Jay Hill went. And Jay Hill obviously going to Michigan. There was some thought, okay, maybe Gary's going to Ann Arbor, but he announced that he's planning on sticking around BYU, and he plans on retaining the analyst role that he has held at BYU for the majority of the past 2 seasons since coming to Provo, Utah. Well, a lot of you have said, well, why isn't he moving up to the defensive coordinator spot, Jake? What's going on here? From my vantage point, I think Gary really likes the role he's in because what it is, as an analyst, you're simply focused on coaching. When you become a full-time assistant coach, you're responsible for recruiting, making recruiting visits, all of the paperwork in terms of retaining talent, convincing guys when it comes to the transfer portal, whether to go into the portal, come out of the portal. There's so much of the, I don't know, bureaucracy might not be the right term, but there's a lot of stuff in terms of off the field that you have to handle as a full-time position coach. And Gary Anderson, he's been in the rat race for a really, really long time. He did it as a position coach. He did it as a head coach at multiple stops, including Utah State, Wisconsin, Oregon State. And I think that the way that he operates right now is Gary, as he told the Hans and Scotty G, he wants to coach. He wants to coach players, help the next generation of players, but he also wants to help coaches as well. Well, as it stands, BYU is going to be naming a new defensive coordinator at some point in the relatively near future, and all eyes right now are on the name Kelly Poppinga, who looks like he is the odds-on favorite to become that. And the thing with Kelly is, in his coaching career, Kelly has been a special teams coordinator. He's been a linebackers coach. He's been an edges coach. He's been a defensive ends coach, obviously most recently at BYU. And the only time he's been a defensive coordinator was as a co-defensive coordinator under Bronco Mendenhall, working alongside Nick Howell when they were out at Virginia. I believe it was for 2 seasons, if I recall correctly, that Kelly carried that title. As I understand it, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't believe that Kelly at any point had the decision-making, play-calling power when it came to that position he had at Virginia. Well, if he is going to be BYU's defensive coordinator, who better to be right there, right next to him in the booth, or whether he's on the field or regardless, is to have a guy like Gary Anderson in his analyst role that you can get ideas from and talk strategy with. Gary knows the defense that BYU has implemented. They're not going to wholesale change the defense that Jay Hill spent the last 3 seasons implementing at BYU. It's the defense, quite frankly, that Kalani Sitake has wanted at BYU the entire time he's been there. And they had fits and starts in terms of what happened under the previous regime of defensive coaches, but they're going to keep this thing rolling. And Gary, in his role, as he also told the Hans and Scotty G, it's not going to be focused particularly on defensive tackles this year, which was his specialty, is what he was coaching up last year. He was on the field. He's working with defensive tackles, talking through how to beat guys on double teams and that type of stuff. He was in the nitty gritty right there on the grass, working with those D tackles. He says he's going to have a more multifaceted role this year, and I think that's exactly what BYU needs for him to be. Because yes, let's say it is Kelly Poppinga for the first time as a defensive coordinator having play calling responsibilities. Well, I think he has an understanding what this defense entails, and obviously he'll have some ideas of how he can tweak it a little bit. But Gary Anderson can be right there with him saying, hey, look at this, consider that, what about this? And his ability to, I think, to bebop around and work with multiple groups of guys, find ways to impact the BYU football program. That's exactly, I think, a tailor-made fit for what Gary is at this point in his career. If what he said is true, he wants to coach the next generation of players, but also help the next generation of coaches. This is an absolutely incredible role that has been carved out for Gary, and I think he's going to absolutely thrive in it, because this is what he wants to do, is he wants to just coach. He doesn't want to have to deal with the off the field stuff when it comes to recruiting. Yeah, you can leave that to a guy like Kelly Poppinga, because I can tell you, Kelly, from what I understand, talking with high school coaches and others who know him very, very well, he's one of the most dogged recruiters on BYU staff, and that includes the guys like Jay Hill, Gennaro Guilford, Aaron Roderick, Fesi Sitake. Kalani Sitake has got a really, really good stable of assistant coaches who are by and large responsible for the day-to-day recruiting of players in their set position groups, and not even beyond that. They have set areas that they recruit. Well, I think that if you have a guy like Gary Anderson, what Kelly lacks in play calling experience, you'll make up for with a guy like Gary Anderson helping him out on that side of things, while Kelly continues to kind of keep the trend going of recruiting high-level defensive talent to put into this defense and help them thrive on the field. So understand that while Gary, you're probably thinking, why isn't he moving up to the defensive coordinator role? It's because he probably doesn't want it. If he wanted it, I'm sure Kalani Sitake would have no problem saying, Gary, it's all yours, man, because Gary has the experience. He did it for Kyle Whittingham at an extremely high level. He coached defense during his head coaching tenures at each stop, and by and large, have pretty good success. And his track record speaks for itself. But if he can have a bigger impact, like I said, behind the scenes, where he's I don't want to say the puppet master, but he's kind of the man behind the curtain who's pulling all the strings, to use the Wizard of Oz expression, because, Wicked and all that stuff is in vogue right now. But that can work out, and it absolutely can impact winning for the BYU football program. So I'm here for it. I love the fact that Gary is sticking around, and he said it himself. He grew up with a Ute binky in his mouth. He wore red his entire life, played at Utah, coached at Utah, went to Utah State, wore that shade of blue, and now he's wearing BYU gear. I can tell you, just knowing what I've known over the years of Gary Anderson, it was a really, really weird look the first time I saw him trotting off the field in Provo wearing BYU gear. But from all accounts, including his own and what he's said about what he's done at BYU, it's been a match made in heaven, and it looks like it could have a major impact on BYU's fortunes in 2026 and beyond, with him still right there in the thick of things, just not having to deal with, like I said, the off-the-field stuff that he doesn't want to deal with. He can be on the field, coaching his guys, helping everybody in any way, shape, or form that he possibly can, and then at the same time, helping a first-time defensive coordinator settle in at that spot. Yeah, I think this is a major, I guess retainment is probably the best term to use. To not lose Gary, it's big for Kalani Sitake and company, because he is going to be a very, very impactful individual, even if he's not front and center in next fall, next season, next week, whenever it is. Gary is going to have an outsized role for the BYU football program, and get ready for it, because the track record with Gary Anderson has been pretty good success on the football field. And I think in this role, it absolutely helps him thrive even more than he could as the defensive coordinator for BYU. All right, we'll finish up today's show coming up next. There is one position group. We're flipping back over to the offense that, based on what I have seen in terms of portal entries so far, that BYU could be connected to. Well, let's just put it this way. The BYU offensive line could get a major upgrade if that's exactly what Aaron Roderick, Kalani Sitake, and TJ Woods want, because, man, there's a lot of those guys out there in the ether. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like the college football season is winding to a close with the college football playoff, finishing things up. But there's tailgates, packed stadium, being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments that you always will remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be the most frustrating part. Long queues, logins, prices jumping at checkout. Well, that's where Game Time steps into the fray. They are giving the advantage back to you as the fans. The easiest way to unlock amazing tickets and experiences in just a few taps. Best part is you can open the app. It's super simple and easy to use. You can go from browsing to buying tickets in mere minutes, and literally in a mere number of taps right there in the app. You can see exactly what your seat view is going to be. The zone deals stand out. You pick a section, they pick the seats, and you save even more money. And knowing prices include all fees right up front makes the whole process stress-free. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets and do it with our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply against the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you want the inside intel that you crave when it comes to all things BYU, join the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club. Get access to an ad-free audio feed for our Locked On Cougars podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. An invite to our Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. Includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. If you want to be a part of it, it's a great way to kind of get the feel of like what Twitter and social media used to be before the algorithms, as they say, took things over. If you want to be a part of that, check it out by going to lockedoncougars.supercast.com. That's lockedoncougars.supercast.com, or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, so before we go on today's show, there is a position group that I believe that BYU, with some of the changes going on with their offensive line, well, the O-line could be a place that BYU could beef up spectacularly in the transfer portal. I'm not saying that they have to, because BYU's got a pretty good core of guys returning. Bruce Mitchell, I thought was absolutely phenomenal and should be even better in his senior season at center for BYU. You also have guys like Andrew Gentry, whether he plays right or left tackle. He's been nothing short of a stalwart for BYU. You also look at a guy like Kyle Sfarcioc, Sonny Makasini, who both announced that they're locked in and coming back next year for BYU. Yeah, the offensive line's in a very good spot for BYU, but reinforcements, they're out there. And if BYU wants to bolster their offensive line, and I've said this before on this podcast, if you want to see the best version of BYU, well, they need to be as good as they possibly can be in the trenches, both offensively and defensively. Those offensive and defensive lines, to use the Jeff Grimes expression, they truly have to be the tip of the spear. They've got to lead the way for the BYU football program. And just kind of looking at some of the guys out there in the transfer portal, there's a lot of guys BYU could go in on. One yesterday announced he got an offer from BYU. It was Jr Sia from Utah State University. Well, once upon a time, there was a guy by the name of Walker Lyons who started all 13 games, I think, of his lone season in Logan, who ended up transferring to BYU. And Waylon turned in maybe the single best guy on BYU's offensive line for a long stretch. I thought Waylon was absolutely awesome at left guard. Had an injury-marred campaign this year, but did not take away what he meant to BYU. Well, Jr Sia was offered by BYU at a high school, ultimately settled by going to Utah State. And now after sitting out in terms of red shirt and not playing in 2024, played in every game this year for Utah State and proved to be a pretty reliable guy on that offensive line. Could we see the next coming of a Walker Lyons, a kid from Salt Lake Valley, because Junior played at West, if I recall correctly. Waylon played at Harriman. I might be wrong on that, but the nice part is Jr Sia could be a guy BYU looks at. Kalolo Ta'aga was another guy that BYU offered in the past. Well, he spent time at both USC and then played at Utah this past year. Hasn't seen much playing time, but could he be an option for BYU along that offensive front? Other guys, Nuku Mafi, I think another West product, and Nuku, I vividly remember having a BYU offer out of West High School. He went to Oklahoma State. Well, all the changes going on in Stillwater, he hit the portal, and at 6'4", 325 pounds, like, okay, yeah, that guy probably fits what BYU's looking for along this offensive line. And that's just three guys I mentioned. I'm telling you, if you went through the transfer portal and guys that BYU's been connected to along the offensive line, there could be 4, 5, 6, 7 guys that BYU either offered out of high school, offered at different points when it came to the transfer portal, or simply just has interest now, whether they're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they got connections to the university via family, etc. If BYU wants to bolster this offensive line, there's a lot of guys out there, and BYU could scoop them up, because if we're what we have been told and reported to is believed is true, BYU has a need, because you lose both Isaiah Jada and Walker Lyons off the left side of BYU's offensive line. So that's an offensive tackle and that's an offensive guard spot that are up for grabs there. And that's what you can sell guys on when it comes to the offensive line. That's what a lot of guys in the transfer portal are looking for. They're looking for an opportunity. They either want to play at a higher level if they've already played, in the case of a guy like Jr Sia, or in the case of Kalolo Ta'aga, or a guy like Nuku Mafi. They haven't necessarily played as much as they've wanted to, but they're still pretty young in their college careers. They're looking for opportunity. And that's what TJ Woods, Aaron Roderick, Kalani Sitake, etc., can go out there and sell to these young men. Tell them, hey, guess what? We've had a pretty good offensive line. Can you help us take it to the next level? Because I think that we all saw against Texas Tech, BYU's inability to block Texas Tech's elite defensive line. Well, if what Oregon did to Texas Tech is legitimate, and I don't necessarily think it to be that way, because I do think Texas Tech would have been better on any other day, it feels like. That's just maybe some fan fiction on my part. But we saw what Texas Tech did defensively against BYU's offensive line. They need to be better in the trenches. And guys out there in the portal, I'm not saying that they're going to make BYU better, but at bare minimum, they can come in and offer competitive depth. That iron sharpens iron concept, that should lend itself to BYU having the best version of their offensive line that they hopefully have had to date. They've had some pretty good offensive lines and have put a number of offensive linemen in the NFL of late for BYU. You don't have to look very far to find that track record. And that's another selling point to these young men. So I look at this as a big, big opportunity for BYU. This is one position group. There's running back spots, because we've talked about guys like Joshua Dye out there. Leo Pulalasi, who once upon a time had a BYU offer, is also out there in the transfer portal. We know that BYU needs running backs. Well, those running backs are going to be rendered ineffective if the offensive line can't open holes for them. So while the offensive line doesn't garner the eyeballs or the views that I think it should, it's a position group that is absolutely critical. And like I said, you don't have to look very far. Just look at the Texas Tech matchups that BYU played against Texas Tech. That defensive line for Texas Tech was downright elite, and it tortured BYU's offensive line. And I know that stung BYU because they thought that they had a better offensive front than that. Well, you learned a lesson there. So you got to be better. So if you can go out there and get guys into this program and explain to them, we were good. Trust me, we won 11, 12 games last year, but we want to win. We want to go 12-0. We want to go 13, 14-0. You can hopefully help us get over that hump and be able to stand up against teams like a Texas Tech. And like I say, you get in the playoff, the likes of Oregon, etc. Those elite defensive fronts, well, guess what? They will render your offense just absolutely inert if you cannot protect your quarterback, open holes for your running backs. If you just can't function as an offense, guess what? Makes it really easy to win football games. So yeah, it starts up front. And BYU, based on what I've seen from the names I'm tracking in the transfer portal, they have got a number of guys who I think at minimum are 2 deep type guys you can bring in, if not outright starters. That's the good news, is these are not guys that you're just taking to take. No, these are guys who are going to have competitive offers from other programs. And if BYU can get to work on these guys and kind of sell the vision of what they see for BYU and these young men as part of the BYU football program, yeah, could be a really, really fun 2026 season, because BYU's not got a dearth of talent right now. They've got a lot going for them. They've got a sensational young quarterback. We'll see what happens with LJ Martin. They've got a pretty decent group of wide receivers coming back. They are looking for a tight end, but there are pieces that BYU has to build around that are critical pieces for successful football programs, but you need to have a better offensive front. And that's why I believe the way this transfer portal is shaping up could be a nice haul for BYU if they want to go out and get it in terms of their offensive line. I'm just speaking from my side of things. TJ Woods could like what he has internally and decide, you know what, we're going to stick with the status quo. But I'm telling you, there's enough guys out there, enough guys who have connections to BYU, whether it was offers in the past, guys they've pursued in the transfer portal before. There's also Paki Finau. I forgot about him from Washington High School. He told 24/7 Sports that he was recruited out of high school by BYU. He was in the portal last year, and TJ Woods went after him. So and he was a pretty good offensive lineman for Washington, speaking of the Huskies in the Big Ten. So that's just another name to track here. The nice part is, like I said, there's no shortage of options out here, and TJ Woods should have a major opportunity to upgrade this offensive line if that's exactly what he hopes to do. And looks like on paper, there's a lot of names that BYU could be adding if they get to work here very, very quickly. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the show. As always, thank you for your continued support of the show. Thank you for making it your first listen today. Make your second listen today. Our friends over at the Locked On College Football Podcast, Spencer McLaughlin and the people he has on, absolutely killing. And I've been on there a handful of times myself, doing a great job covering the sport that we love. And also, make sure you join the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club. LockedOnCougars.supercast.com. Got different tiers of membership. You can get all kinds of different perks, access to stuff. That's the best part about what we're doing here on Locked On. So as always, thank you for all of your continued support. Please subscribe, rate, review, share this with your family and friends. And until tomorrow, come back and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.